She was never meant to die. Not her. Not the little girl with platinum hair and eyes that shimmered like starlight. Audiences everywhere remembered her whisper, "They're here." She became the face of one of the most iconic horror films in history, a symbol of innocence trapped in a nightmare. But off-screen, there was no special effects team, no second take, only a child waking up one morning with a stomachache, and by nightfall, she was gone. Heather O'Rourke's death at age 12 wasn't just unexpected, it was devastating. A tragedy born not from fate, but from human error, from grown-ups not listening, from doctors getting it wrong, from a system that failed to protect her. She should have lived to become a teenager, to graduate, to fall in love, to look back at her childhood stardom with a smile, but instead, she became a ghost of her own making, frozen in time, forever 6 years old in the minds of millions. This is the untold story of Heather O'Rourke. Heather Michelle O'Rourke didn't storm into Hollywood. She drifted in like mist, quiet, pure, mesmerizing. Born on December 27, 1975 in San Diego, California, Heather was the younger of two sisters. Her blonde hair was almost white, her eyes a translucent blue, and her voice carried an otherworldly clarity that echoed long after she spoke. She was discovered the way stars in fairy tales are, by chance. Sitting outside a commissary at MGM Studios, waiting for her sister to finish an audition, she caught the attention of none other than Steven Spielberg. He saw something in her gaze, something uncanny, something beyond her years. At just 5 years old, she was cast as Carol Ann in Poltergeist, the girl who would become the face of the supernatural for a generation. In the film, Carol Ann is the conduit between the living and the dead, a fragile child drawn into a dimension of spirits. And Heather, with her ethereal beauty and haunting stillness, didn't just play the role. She became it. "They're here." The way she whispered that line didn't just startle, it lingered. It carved itself into pop culture like a scar across a mirror. She was dubbed the Ghost Girl, the Child Medium, America's sweetheart of horror. Magazine covers, interviews, and press tours followed. She wasn't just a child actor. She was a symbol. But outside the flashing lights and marketing machinery, Heather was still just a little girl. She liked riding her bike. She loved her Cabbage Patch dolls. She played with her cat, read Nancy Drew books, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She didn't live in Beverly Hills or behind gated mansions. She and her family lived modestly in a San Diego suburb. Her mother, Kathleen, was fiercely protective, working tirelessly to balance Heather's stardom with some semblance of a normal life. Heather wasn't spoiled or bratty. She was polite on set, punctual and professional beyond her age. Directors praised her ability to hit emotional marks that actors twice her age struggled with. But even as the public adored her, something darker lingered behind the spotlight, a quiet suffering that no camera ever caught. Heather was smiling for the world, but her body was already whispering that something was wrong. Behind the cherubic face and camera-ready smile, Heather O'Rourke's childhood was not as weightless as it looked. She didn't grow up surrounded by agents and chauffeurs, but in a modest apartment complex in Lakeside, California, raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to give her daughters stability after a difficult divorce. Her father wasn't around much. Heather rarely spoke of him. Her world centered on her mother, Kathleen, and her older sister, Tammy, and later, on a growing series of medical visits that began with what everyone assumed were ordinary childhood ailments. At just 4 years old, Heather was diagnosed with giardiasis, a parasitic intestinal infection that caused bloating, cramping, and persistent nausea. But as the years passed, the symptoms never truly went away. She would vomit between takes, complain of pain that no one could explain. Her stomach would distend suddenly, and sometimes she couldn't eat at all. Doctors began to suspect Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammatory bowel condition. It was a serious diagnosis, but not life-threatening, they said. She was given steroids, told to rest, and then asked to return to set. Heather did, always. She would sit quietly in her chair, wrapped in oversized sweaters, pale and tired, before stepping into scenes with uncanny focus. To the crew, she was a consummate professional. To her mother, she was a child in distress. But what could they do when the medical files said she was managing? What could anyone do when Hollywood was calling, when Poltergeist 3rd needed to be finished, when deadlines loomed? No one questioned that Heather was in pain. They just assumed she could bear it. She always had. What no one knew was that beneath the surface, her intestines were slowly shutting down. The steroids meant to help were masking a ticking bomb, a congenital defect in her intestine that had never been caught. In the final months of her life, her cheeks grew puffier, a side effect of the medication. Her stomach hurt constantly, but interviews still had to be done, scenes still had to be shot, and Heather, the ever-smiling, ever-composed Heather, kept saying she was okay. Perhaps she thought she was. Perhaps no one had told her the full truth. Perhaps even she had begun to believe that pain was just part of life. She had been trained by circumstance and by the industry to endure. But behind her bright eyes was a little girl being failed again and again by a world that demanded perfection and misunderstood fragility. And when the moment finally came, when her body gave way, no one was prepared, because they'd been looking for ghosts on screen while ignoring the one slowly fading in real life. Heather O'Rourke didn't reinvent herself. She was reinvented by everyone else. Hollywood has a way of freezing its most beloved images, and Heather's image was never meant to age. To the world, she was Carol Ann, the otherworldly girl with feather-light hair, doll-like features, and that eerie calm in the face of terror. But children are not meant to remain static. They grow, their faces shift, their voices deepen. Heather was no different. By the time she began filming Poltergeist III, Heather was entering adolescence. Her round cheeks began to sharpen. Her baby blonde hair darkened to a golden ash. Her voice, once high and crystalline, was starting to take on the timbre of a preteen. For most young actors, this is a natural transition. For Heather, it was seen as a threat to the brand. Studio executives and producers panicked. She couldn't look older, not when the character of Carol Ann was still supposed to be just a child, trapped in that same supernatural nightmare. So they worked around it. They dyed her hair lighter to match her younger self. They used makeup to erase the contours of puberty, to soften her maturing features, to paint her back into childhood. Wardrobe choices reverted to pastel dresses and childlike accessories, a visual fiction that Heather herself was instructed to maintain. She became a character in her own life. One crew member described how Heather would arrive on set in jeans and a sweatshirt, laughing like a normal girl. But before cameras rolled, the transformation began. The costuming, the hair curling, the baby voice rehearsal. It was no longer acting, it was containment. Even her public image was tightly controlled. Interviews were kept brief. Topics were light. She was not asked about her health, her fears, or her thoughts on fame. She was asked about her pets, about what she liked to eat, about being cute. One interviewer noted that Heather always seemed composed, but older than her years, like a child carefully balancing what she was allowed to say. At home, her mother noticed a subtle shift. Heather, who used to love acting, began to express quiet frustration. She wanted to try different roles, comedies, fantasy films, maybe something where she wasn't being haunted or crying. She wanted to grow up. Hollywood didn't want her to. In a moment of unexpected honesty, Heather once said in a local TV spot, "Sometimes I want to be me, not Carol Ann. But people really like her, so I guess that's okay." That wasn't okay, but she said it with a smile, because that was what everyone expected. Heather O'Rourke, the girl who could conjure ghosts with a whisper, had become a ghost herself, not in death, but in life. Her real self was hidden under layers of makeup, costuming, and expectation. She didn't rise in Hollywood. She was curated, polished, preserved, a porcelain figurine that no one thought could break. Until she did. In 1987, Heather O'Rourke stood on the pinnacle of child stardom. She was the face of a franchise, the voice of a generation's nightmares, and a beloved symbol of innocence in a genre drenched in terror. She had been nominated for a Saturn Award. She had fan clubs, magazine covers, and Hollywood's finest calling her a natural. At just 11 years old, she was already a veteran, filming her third Poltergeist film, giving press interviews, and attending red carpets with a poise that didn't belong to someone her age. But the camera doesn't see fatigue. It doesn't hear the stomach cramps. It doesn't feel the way her body had begun to betray her. Quietly, steadily, and fatally. Her face was changing. Not from age alone, but from medication. Doctors had misdiagnosed her condition as Crohn's disease and prescribed corticosteroids. The drugs caused moon face swelling, which tabloids attributed to Hollywood weight gain, even as her mother watched her daughter deteriorate behind the scenes. On set, Heather remained professional. She didn't complain. She showed up, smiled, and hit her marks, even when she was too nauseous to eat or too tired to walk without support. Her final scenes in Poltergeist III required her to perform in freezing temperatures amidst artificial fog, intense lighting, and physical stunts that would challenge adults. No one questioned if she should be doing this. She was a star. Stars show up. Stars don't fall apart. But Heather was falling apart. On January 31st, 1988, just weeks after her 12th birthday, she woke up with violent abdominal pain. She vomited repeatedly. Her legs gave out. Her mother rushed her to a nearby hospital where doctors misread the signs again, assuming it was a case of the flu. They gave her fluids, painkillers, and sent her home. But something was terribly wrong. By the time she returned to the hospital, this time unconscious, her intestines had ruptured. The infection spread fast, sepsis set in, her heart began to fail. At 12:45 p.m. on February 1st, 1988, Heather O'Rourke died during emergency surgery at Children's Hospital and Health Center in San Diego. The official cause, congenital intestinal stenosis, a rare undiagnosed birth defect that had gone unnoticed for 12 years. Hollywood was stunned. No one had seen it coming. She had been filming just weeks earlier, smiling in interviews, signing autographs. No one thought the girl who had survived ghosts on screen would be taken by something as mundane and as preventable as a misdiagnosed illness. In the final version of Poltergeist III, her last film, some scenes were digitally manipulated to finish the story without her. It was meant to preserve the illusion. But the illusion had already shattered. Heather O'Rourke was gone, and for the first time, the silence behind "they're here" felt heartbreakingly real. Heather O'Rourke didn't grow up. She didn't get the awkward teenage years, the first kiss, the graduation photo in a cap and gown. She didn't get the second act. She left behind no memoir, no farewell speech, no final Instagram post. Only a faint whisper, replayed endlessly in VHS tapes and streaming platforms. They're here. Heather's death struck a nerve deeper than a typical Hollywood tragedy, because it wasn't a fall from fame. It was a failure of protection by medicine, by the industry, by everyone who assumed children are too young to break. After she died, her story became a cautionary tale, whispered in casting offices, passed quietly between producers, cited in new health protocols for child actors. But still, too late for her. Her mother never stopped grieving. Her fans never stopped watching. And to this day, when people revisit Poltergeist, they don't see just a performance. They see a little girl calling out from the edge of another world. Real, raw, and hauntingly close. Heather didn't fade. She became something else entirely, not a ghost, but a question, a warning, a whisper echoing through Hollywood's golden silence. Who watches over the children who make us dream?